Dr. Carl Jung said the world will ask you who you are, and if you don't know, the world will tell you. It's the fundamental contradiction. And me, I like making videos about the physiology of mitochondria and how that knowledge is causing a convergence in spirituality and science rather than a divergence. But just remember, after 6 years I remain suspended in nutritional medicine and can only work as a specialist in a public emergency department. So none of this is medical or health advice made purely for entertainment and educational purposes. It also does not replace a professional relationship with your own healthcare provider, and just because I go jumping in icy lakes doesn't mean anybody else should, unless they have proper training in the hormetic principles of contrast therapy. So I'm down for sunrise at the beach wearing a garish red jacket. Why? Because it's a hot suit. So very soon I'm going to be climbing a very large mountain. I'm not going to tell you which one, but I'll be making some videos from there. So hopefully you better share the journey with me. But the hot suit allows me to sweat a lot more while I'm exercising. Kind of a mini sauna, detox. Just got to make sure I replace those fluids with healthy water afterwards. Okay, let's get started. I've got 3 great studies to talk about today. One is about compound K in ginseng and its effects on mitochondria. The second one is what is FAMZ10A and its effect on the mitochondria. And the third one is what happens if we combine exercise with cold water exposure. Say I was to go for a swim this morning. Does that have a multiple effect? How about that crowd on the beach? How good is it? People getting up for sunrise now. Setting their circadian clock in their suprachiasmatic nucleus for the day. So all the bodily functions happen on time and on schedule. Great to see. Woohoo! But before I discuss those 3 studies, I want to talk about a hypothesis I came up with while doing some prayer and meditation a couple of days ago. And this hypothesis will provide the structure and framework for my ongoing work and video creation, subjects I'm really passionate about discussing. So let's have a look what we've learned over the last few months, and we'll put it together in this hypothesis. We've discussed biogenic failure, the life force leaving the mitochondria. We've discussed how mitochondria are both the driver and the engine of the car, the CEO, as well as the powerhouse. We've discussed how science now shows that we start our life chosen. The egg chooses the sperm. It's not a random event. We've discussed how life begins with a spark of light called the zinc spark. We've discussed how we produce light for the rest of our lives as biophotons. That light slowly diminishes intensity as we age, as our mitochondria produce less energy by passing electrons along the inner mitochondrial membrane, and less charge by passing protons across the inner mitochondrial membrane. And we've also discussed how we have the ability to modify that process, but ultimately, for all of us, the light eventually switches itself off. So here's a hypothesis I'm going to spend the remaining part of my life discussing and exploring. My hypothesis is that this process is far too complicated for it to be a random event, and coupled with our inability to explain how life starts and how we get something from nothing, means that we have to be created rather than being a random event, a bunch of amorphous sea minerals coming together in a sea of goop. The elusive flow state occurs when our light briefly reconnects with the light of creation, and because the physics law of conservation of energy has shown that energy is never destroyed, only transformed, means that we are created and our life does not end here. So, let's have a look at these 3 studies I'm going to discuss today and see how it fits in with this hypothesis. Right, let's have a look at the first research study, which is about one of the great adaptogenic herbs of the world, and in my top 4 favourite herbs of all time, which includes ashwagandha, astragalus, turmeric, but also Panax ginseng, one of the great herbs of traditional Chinese medicine. And we're going to have a look at the study which shows that a special compound in ginseng called compound K mimics the effects of cold thermogenesis on our mitochondria. But before we look at that study, let's just review the known beneficial effects of ginseng. The research shows that it's anti-inflammatory, reduces the risk of cancer, reduces free radical production, it protects our liver, it increases energy through its mitochondrial effects, and it reduces our risk of diabetes. And I suppose it's best known as an adaptogenic herb in traditional Chinese medicine, or a rasayana herb in Ayurveda, which shows it kind of normalizes our stress levels, stops the fluctuations or the effects of the fluctuations of stress on our body. So compound K, just like cold thermogenesis, increases a new term for us, UPC1. What does UPC1 do? Because ginseng increases UPC1. That's the take-home message, that ginseng increases UPC1, particularly red ginseng. So what does UPC1 do in terms of the mitochondria? Well, 6 things we know about. 1, it improves electron flow in the mitochondria. 2, it increases mitogenesis, which is the formation of new mitochondria. 3, it decreases reactive oxygen species, the free radicals that we produce from the mitochondria, which are bad because they're pollution, but also good because we use some of those free radicals to fight infections, destroy malignant cells, and one of them is carbon dioxide, which we use to make bicarbonate in the body. UPC1 also converts WAT to BAT. Well, what's WAT? WAT is white adipose tissue and BAT is brown adipose tissue. And we all know now that there are really 3 forms of adipose tissue or fat tissue in our body. That's white, beige and brown, and they all have a different function. Well, beige is really the intermediate process of white fat being converted into brown fat. White fat stores energy, brown fat burns energy. Burns energy because it's brown, because it's full of mitochondria, so it burns fat to create energy, but it also has the ability to burn fat to keep us warm, to create heat, which is called non-shivering thermogenesis, because the other way we produce heat to warm us up is by shivering, which is increased muscular activity. So the main role of UPC1 is to uncouple energy and heat production. Just imagine 2 railway tracks. You're on a train, we're on a train going on a direction with one set of railway tracks, and then there's another track which branches off, and the train master is able to convert the train in either direction with either track. Well, uncoupling protein C means the mitochondria, well, UPC1 is used to switch the mitochondria from purely energy production into both energy and heat production. And we know that cold thermogenesis works by increasing UPC1, and now we know that compound K in ginseng also increases UPC1. So that all happens in BAT, brown adipose tissue. And the main function of BAT is to protect us against obesity and to protect us against the cold. By burning fat to get rid of excess storage of energy and to keep us warm. And essentially all obesity is an imbalance between energy production and energy expenditure. And research has shown that obesity is associated with increased white adipose tissue, decreased brown adipose tissue, decreased mitochondrial numbers, and decreased mitochondrial activity. So in summary, Panax ginseng containing compound K increases UPC1 levels, which decouples mitochondria from energy production and allows them to produce a lot of heat as well, which mimics the effects of cold thermogenesis by increasing energy expenditure and converting white fat to brown fat. Before I go on, let's quickly review the benefits of cold thermogenesis, getting in cold water. I made a video once a long time ago when I had my farm sitting in the creek which ran down from my farm at Tambourine Mountain in Queensland, where I talked about the mnemonic bread. I've changed that slightly now, changed it to cold bread. So cold means cold shock proteins, which are the same as heat shock proteins, and cold and heat shock proteins are involved in the folding of proteins in the body and also correction of misfolded proteins or the destruction of severely damaged misfolded proteins. So cold shock proteins. B is for biofilms. Cold thermogenesis helps dissolve biofilms, which is the snotty layer of mucus that groups of microbes surround themselves with to protect themselves from the immune system. R is resilience, increases our resilience to illness. E is energy. We produce more energy because of the production of brown fat by cold thermogenesis, and brown fat is brown because it's full of mitochondria. A is arterial constriction, because in the cold water we get the hunting effect where our arteries first constrict to protect our vital organs from the cold, but then dilate 15 minutes later because they've got to stop our skin from falling off. So you get that dilation constriction effect, which is exercising the endothelium, which is our biggest muscle in the body. And like any muscle that we don't use, it starts to get stiff if we don't use it. And stiffening of the endothelium means you're trying to pump your blood through a lead pipe rather than a supple tube, and that causes high blood pressure. D is for dissolving fat, because our brown fat burns fat to produce heat for the body as well as energy. So cold bread, cold shock proteins, dissolving biofilms, building resilience, increasing energy, arterial constriction and dilation, and dissolving fat. Okay, let's have a look at study number 2. Study number 2 is concerned with FAMZ10A, a new protein for us. So, what is FAMZ10A? Well, it's a cold inducible mitochondrial inner membrane protein. A cold induced mitochondrial inner membrane protein. So remember, the inner mitochondrial membrane is where we pass electrons along it to produce ATP for energy, as well as biophotons, water, heat, reactive oxygen species. It's also where we pass protons across the inner mitochondrial membrane, which produces a charge in the cells as well. That's where the concept of mitochondria being the batteries of the cells comes from, because they produce energy and charge. And this study has shown that FAMZ10A is involved in the cold-induced mitochondrial remodeling, and again allows the heat production for non-shivering thermogenesis. because they found that if they removed FAMZ108 from the inner mitochondrial membrane of mice, then those mice, when exposed to cold, were not able to increase their heat production and were a much greater risk of an adverse outcome from being exposed to the cold. And so how does FAMZ108 increase non-shivering thermogenesis? Well, the process is called mitochondrial dynamics. Mitochondrial dynamics include fission, which is the mitochondria splitting to make more mitochondria, fusion, joining together to make less mitochondria, biogenesis, the creation of new mitochondria, mitophagy, the destruction of damaged mitochondria, and plasticity. So we haven't really talked about mitochondrial plasticity much before, but that's basically where the cristae, the folds in the inner mitochondrial membrane, which are very obvious when you look at pictures of mitochondria. Plasticity is where the cristae of the inner mitochondrial membrane change shape, getting closer together or further apart. When that happens, it can either speed up or delay transfer of electrons along the inner mitochondrial membrane. So that's how FAMZ108 creates more heat, because it adjusts plasticity of the mitochondria, changes the shape of the inner mitochondrial membrane cristae to allow more heat production for non-shivering thermogenesis. So now we know that ginseng, compound K in ginseng, mimics the effects of cold thermogenesis by increasing the conversion of white fat to brown fat and increasing UPC1 to uncouple energy production from heat production and burn more calories, because we're burning calories to produce a lot more heat as well as energy. And we know that FAMZ108 is the protein in the inner mitochondrial membrane which allows mitochondrial plasticity to adjust the heat and energy production by changing the shape of the cristae of the inner mitochondrial membrane. So let's have a look if we get an additive effect if we combine ginseng with exercise and cold water exposure. And yes, the third study shows, as we thought, that if we combine exercise with cold thermogenesis, like swimming in cold water, then we get increased energy metabolism, we get increased mitochondrial production and increased mitochondrial dynamics. So throw some ginseng in there as well, probably going to get a triple benefit. So that's it from me today, down at the beach in my red hot suit sweating. And just remember, as the Navy SEALs say, doesn't matter how much it hurts, how dark it gets, or how far you fall, you are never out of the fight. Don't give up. All right, if you've liked the video, you can give it a like, thumbs up on YouTube, helps the algorithm, and subscribe to the channel because I've got a lot of really super exciting content coming up from some exotic locations and some fascinating people working and living in these areas that we discuss. So like and subscribe to the channel, and as usual, peace and love. See you next time. Bye.